Chapter 13, Passengers. Tentacles by Roland Smith. The sailboat looked like a rowboat next to the giant Kolnikov. By the time Marty, Luther, and Wolf reached the deck, the sailboat's crew had disembarked. Phil and Bertha Bishop were talking to Al Ikes. With them were a man, a woman, a boy, and a girl a few years older than Marty and Luther, and a very old dog. Marty was disappointed to see that crazy Theo Sonborn was not waiting with his gear to leave the Kolnikov and undergo a cavity search by Al Ikes. In fact, none of the crew members had lined up to abandon ship. All disposable gloves would have to wait for another day. Bertha's walked over and gave Marty a bone-crunching hug, and Luther's weird hair a pat. "Are you boys staying out of trouble?" "More or less," Marty said. "Less, I suspect," Phil said, joining them. "Come on over and meet our ride." Al walked away without a word as Marty and Luther joined the group. Wolf was talking to the foursome and appeared to be excited about something that the boy was telling him. "And the toucan flies," the boy was saying. "I think that's pretty close to the preserve." "This is my nephew, Marty," Wolf said, "and his friend, Luther." "Rand Mackenzie," the man said with an Australian accent. "But you can call me Mac. This is my wife, Sandra, my daughter, Nicole, and this," he pointed to the dark-haired boy who had been talking, "is Jake Lanza, the son of a friend of mine, Dr. Robert Lanza, who just happens to be establishing a jaguar preserve in Brazil, not far from where our parents' helicopter went down." "Sorry to hear about the accident," Jake said, with an American accent. "Thanks," Marty said. "Have you been to the preserve?" "I was there a few months ago," Jake said, "and I'm going back to help my father as soon as we get the sailboat to Australia." He looked at Wolf. "The preserve is in the middle of nowhere, and communication is slow. But if I can use your radio room, I could start the process of getting word to my father about the crash." "That would be great," Wolf said. "We need all the help we can get." "What's it like there?" Marty asked, excited to talk to someone who knew the area. "It's an unexplored rainforest," Jake answered. "But if your parents survived the crash, which it sounds like they did, they could live there indefinitely. There's plenty of food and water if they know what they're doing." "Oh, they know what they're doing," Wolf affirmed. He looked at Marty and Luther. "Do you two want to take Jacob to the radio room?" "Sure," Marty said. "I'll go too," Nicole said. "It'll be nice to stretch my legs on something bigger than our sailboat." "I bet it would," Marty said. The sailboat looked like a bathtub toy compared to the Kolnikov. "Come on." "You'll have to make it quick," Mac warned. "There's a storm coming up behind us, and I'd like to stay in front of it if I can." Wolf nodded and looked at Marty. "Give Jake all of our contact information, including the Gizmo numbers and email." And then he looked at Jake. "Does your dad have a satellite phone?" "Yeah," Jake said, "but it's a little hard to get signal through the canopy." "Give the number to our radio operator. We'll have him try to reach your dad at regular intervals." "Will do," Jake said. Marty and Luther led Jake and Nicole up to the bridge where the radio room was located. The dog followed. "What's the dog's name?" Luther asked. "Dinah," Jake said, "short for dynamite." "Without a fuse," Nicole added. "I thought you were bringing two more besides Bertha and Phil," Marty said. "We did," Jake pointed through the bridge window. Two women were walking very slowly up the gangway. One of them was someone Marty knew very well. "I'll be right back." He ran out and reached the deck just as the woman stepped on. "Laura Lee!" "Hi, Marty." Laurel gave him a big hug. "Grace is sure going to be happy to see you." "I'll be happy to see her too. I've missed both of you." Marty looked at the woman with her and saw that she wasn't doing well. "This is Anna." Before Laurel could get the last name out, Anna threw up on Marty's sneakers. Butch McCall was leaning on the upper deck railing with a dozen other crew members watching the transfer. He recognized both women, but at the moment he was more concerned about the kids' tracking tags going offline than he was about Laura Lee and his friend. Without the tags, it was going to be difficult to avoid bumping into them and impossible to track them. Why did Wolf switch them off? And where was Grace? He thought for sure she would be with Marty and Luther to meet the sailboat. Wolf swept Lauralee off her feet. When he put her down, the tiny poodle jumped out of his pocket and into Lauralee's arms. She and Wolf spoke for a few moments, and he showed her something on his gizmo. Laura stared at the gizmo in wide-eyed surprise, gave Wolf a quick kiss on the cheek, then hurried away. What's the rush? Butch thought as he started to follow her. He didn't get very far. A frantic Dr. Leopold intercepted him. Oh, Dr. O'Connor, I'm glad I found you, Leopold sputtered breathlessly. I'm having another filtration problem in the lab. I need your help. Sure, Butch said, watching Laurel rapidly increase her lead. I'll try to stop by later. I was hoping you could do it now, Dr. Leopold persisted. It's serious. At that point, the real Butch McCall would have grabbed Dr. Leopold by his his lab coat and used the scientist to troll for sharks. But gentle Dr. Dirk O'Connor would never think of such a thing. But Butch watched Laurel trot down a companionway to a lower deck and disappear, and then turned to the squid-like scientist. If it's serious, Butch said, let's take a hook. A hook? Dr. Leopold asked. Butch smiled. I meant luck. The crack had not gotten any bigger, but Grace had seen the egg shudder a couple of times as the hatchling shifted inside its leathery shell. She was accurately aware of the miracle she was observing, but she couldn't help remembering that one of the hatchling's relatives had killed her mother and bitten off her father's leg. She was dealing with these mixed feelings, as she did with all conflicts. By writing in her moleskin, when she heard a light tapping on the laboratory door, she got up, looked through the peephole, and nearly tore the door off the hinges, opening it. Lauralee! With tears running down her face, Grace threw her arms around the small, bird-like scientist and pulled her into the laboratory. Sorry, Mr. Birthday, Laurel said, setting Petey on the ground. I didn't even know you were coming at all, Grace said. Wolf told me that you might stay in the Congo indefinitely. That was a fib, Laurel said. We wanted to surprise you for your birthday, but it took a couple of days longer than I expected to get out of the Congo. By the time I got to Kryptos, you had already left. I flew out with Bertha, Phil, and the journalist named Anna Mika to meet the sailboat. How's Malsalto? Grace asked, smiling at the thought of the trusted friend who had helped to save them at Lake Tell. He's fine, Laurel answered. I invited him to come with me, but I told him that we would have to fly on an airplane and sail across an ocean. He turned around and headed back into the jungle. I bet, Grace said. Did Wolf tell you about the sterile room? He sure did. Laurel looked down at PD. Sorry, but your master said no dogs allowed. She opened the lab door and scooted the little poodle into the hallway. Grace waited happily for Laurel to get into her scrubs. They entered the incubator room together. I don't believe it, Grace said. A small dinosaur head and neck were sticking out of the egg that had pipped. Thanks again for your help, Marty said. He was walking Jake and Nicole back to the sailboat. Luther had taken Anna down to the infirmary after asking her if she'd like to play chess. No problem, Jake said. As soon as my dad gets the message, he'll put the word out and start looking for your parents. And I meant what I said. They're probably just lost. It's easy to get disorientated down there, but there's plenty of food in the canopy and sounds like they've had a lot of field experience. There's a good chance that they're holed up someplace, figuring out a way to get out. Marty knew that Jake might be mistaken, but the other boy's confident tone made him feel better. They stepped aboard the sailboat just as Wolf and Mac were coming up to the gangplank. All set? Wolf asked. Yes, sir, Jake said. Your radio man will probably make contact with my dad before I do, but I sent him a message anyways. Thanks. You better push off, Mac said. Wolf and Marty untied the lines. The little sailboat motored a self-distance away, then unfurled the sheets. There was a good bit of luck running into Jake Lanso, Wolf said. I met his father at a conference once, and he was one of the best field biologists in the world. If I'd known he was working in the area of the Amazon, I would have tried to get in touch with him when I was down there looking for your mom and dad. Doesn't sound like it's easy to get in touch with anybody down there, Marty said. That's part of the problem. Wolf's gizmo buzzed. He put it to his ear and listened. "We'll be right down." "What's up?" Marty said. "Looks like we have a couple of dinosaurs," Wolf said, grinning. "One's almost all the way out, and the other egg is pipping. We'll pick up Luther from the infirmary on the way." Butch stepped out of Leopold's lab just as Wolf, Marty, and Luther rounded the corner with foolishly eager grins on their faces. He managed to dart back inside just as the Akastic trio burrowed past him. Dr. Leopold was surprised at his abrupt turnaround. "I need to check one more thing," Butch told him. "We can't have your filter breaking down in the middle of the night when we're not here. And I can't have Wolf throwing me into the brig or dumping me into the deserted island if he recognizes me," he thought. He faked a tiny adjustment and turned to his colleague. "That does it. It should be good for the rest of the voyage." "Dr. O'Connor, you're a godsend," Dr. Leopold said. "If you ever find yourself looking for another research position, I would be honored to have you join me." "That's very kind of you," Butch said, peeking out the doorway. There was no sign of the Cryptos crew, which could mean only one thing. History was being made or hatched in Lab 9. Having Wolf and the kids off the grid was going to be a bigger challenge than Butch had anticipated. One thing he could not disguise was his size. Aside from Wolf, he was the tallest person aboard the ship, and now there were even more people on board who might recognize him. The only solution was to eliminate a few of them. The only one among them who was safe was Grace.